The ready room smelled of stale coffee and jet fuel, the kind of mix that settled into every fiber of the carrier's metal skin. Flickering overhead lights cast uneven shadows on scuffed deck plates, and the air felt heavy with the heat that bled in from the flight deck. Lieutenant Mira Donovan sat at the far end of the briefing table, the spine of her kneeboard pressing against her thigh as she flipped through laminated flight charts. Her pen moved in tight, deliberate strokes, marking wind vectors and fuel burn projections, while the others swapped stories over half-empty mugs. The laughter rolled past her without pause, too familiar to be aimed directly, but sharp enough to remind her of where she stood. The mission board glowed against the bulkhead, names in crisp white font, beneath call signs. She had scanned it before sitting down. Halo 2 sat at the very bottom, slotted into the perimeter overwatch role. Every primary strike position belonged to someone else. No one commented on her assignment. No one had to. She heard enough in the silence between glances. The squadron commander's voice carried over the low hum of conversation, outlining ingress routes for the strike group, SAM avoidance corridors, and designated fallback points. As he spoke, Mira noted the way the laser pointer lingered on the lead and flank assignments, the ones where her name had never appeared in months. She didn't bother pretending it was an oversight. Carrier politics and lingering biases worked in quieter ways. When the briefing ended, the room broke into smaller knots of movement. Chairs scraped. Gear bags shifted. Velcro door open. She moved through it with practiced efficiency, collecting her helmet and mask from the rack, securing the oxygen hose in its clip before stepping into the narrow passage toward the prep bay. Two pilots leaned against the bulkhead near the hatch. One smirked as she passed. The other said, "Guess perimeter's better than nothing." Without looking directly at her. She neither slowed nor answered. On the deck, the heat hit hard. The air shimmered above the catapults, carrying the low, rhythmic thud of launches as each jet slammed forward into open sky. Mira knelt beside her aircraft, running one hand along the leading edge of the wing before checking the ordnance loadout. Her fingers traced each connection point, each safety pin. She cross-referenced what she saw against her pre-flight sheet. Moving from wingtip to fuselage in a steady circuit, her helmet rested on the intake lip beside her. Visor angled toward the sea, she climbed the ladder, settled into the seat, and began the checklist in silence. Switches flipped in a precise order, HUD brightening in soft green. She ran a quick systems test. Listening to the familiar sequence of tones, the radio clicked over to the squadron channel. She keyed the mic and said, "Halo 2. Comms check." Static answered. She tried again. Still nothing. It was a test she already knew the result of. An early beat in a pattern she'd stopped taking personally. Below, a deckhand signaled with 2 fingers, waiting for her nod before pulling the ladder clear. Mira slid the oxygen mask into place, tightened the straps, and adjusted the seat height by a fraction until her sightlines matched muscle memory. Her kneeboard sat secured against her leg. Pages already filled with notes she would trust over anything piped in from command mid-flight. Taxi clearance came through in a clipped voice, and she eased the throttle forward. Following the marshaller's wand toward the launch queue, around here, other jets were already spooling up, the deep whine rising to a roar as they took their turns. She watched a pair ahead of her vanish into heat and horizon. The shock of their departure rippling through her canopy, she adjusted a control surface check, eyes scanning each gauge as if reading a language only she understood. The sortie roster flashed again in her mind. Her call sign, sitting at the bottom like a quiet footnote. It wasn't anger she felt so much as a clean, cold awareness. She was here to fly. To be exact, to leave nothing to chance. Whether anyone acknowledged it or not, recognition was a variable she had learned to drop from the equation. The line moved forward. The deck vibrated under the weight of the next catapult shot. Mira advanced into position, the deck crew moving like choreography around her, securing holdbacks, Checking wing sweeps. Signaling status. She kept her breathing slow inside the mask, hands light on the controls, until the precise moment they would tighten. Ahead, the carrier's bow glowed in the haze. Beyond it, the Pacific stretched in a hard line against the sky. She thought about the strike group racing toward their targets, about the space she would hold miles away from the main fight, watching, listening, and waiting for the moment her role might shift. The final signal came. She eased forward into the last launch slot, her jet framed by the shimmer of heat rising from the deck, the ocean waiting beyond. The sky was a pale, washed blue above 20,000 feet, the kind of high-altitude clarity that made every ridge line below look etched in stone. Mira Donovan held her A-18 steady just east of the inland ridge, the ocean stretching behind her, and a jagged band of brown-gray mountains ahead. The strike package she had launched with was already disappearing beyond those peaks, contrails curling white, before fading into the cold air. A moment la terre, thin ribbons of smoke rose from the far side, drifting toward the higher wind. Her hands stayed light on the stick, trim inputs exact enough to keep the horizon steady in her HUD. Sunlight cut hard angles across the instrument panel, green symbology glowing against her visor. The vibration from the engines moved through her seat in a constant, familiar pulse. The oxygen mask pressed cool against her face, carrying the faint scent of rubber and metal. Through the headset, comm chatter came in fragments, warped by static. She caught half of a target confirmation, then nothing. A clipped call for spacing bled into a garbled string she couldn't decipher. She flipped to a fresh page on her kneeboard and began logging what she saw. Her radar gave clean returns on one sweep, then distorted arcs on the next. A contact blinked into existence, shifted position without cause, then vanished. The HUD populated with a cluster of markers well west of their last known location. She toggled filters, checked her own coordinates, and verified her systems, all green, which meant the enemy's electronic warfare was bending the picture, planting ghosts. She keyed the mic. Halo 2. Reporting possible, ghost returns. Sector 7. Grid Delta 3. Static rolled in her ears for 5 full seconds before she switched channels. No acknowledgement. No follow-up. It was the same silence she'd heard during warm-up checks on deck, now stretched across the air between her and the fight. She made a note, circled it twice, and went back to scanning. From here, the ridge looked calm, valleys cut deep into its sides, shadows pooling in their folds. Sunlight flared on something metallic at the base of one slope, then was gone. She logged it anyway. The kneeboard filled quickly with cramped pencil marks, each one anchored to a sweep of her radar. Inside the cockpit, shadows shifted with the sun, catching on the screws of the panel frame. Every so often the engine tone changed by a fraction, a barely audible adjustment in the fly-by-wire system. Her breathing stayed slow under the mask. This was her rhythm watch. Verify. Record. Hold position until told otherwise. No one was telling her anything. She checked fuel state, ran endurance numbers for her current orbit, and jotted them beside her plotted sightings. Somewhere past the mountains, the strike was in motion. Weapons already committed. Out here, she was the edge of the map, invisible until needed. A flicker touched the edge of her scope. For a moment, it registered as a convoy-sized group moving north, then broke into 3 smaller returns, heading different ways. Infrared showed nothing. Another probable decoy. Without confirmation, her notes were the only record it had existed at all. She adjusted the harness against her shoulders, eyes sweeping the horizon. High-altitude tankers left contrails to the east, far beyond her sector. Smoke from the earlier impacts thinned as the wind pushed it eastward. She keyed her mic again, giving a second report with updated coordinates, her voice even, and clipped to standard brevity. The reply was a softer hiss of static. fading until all she could hear was the hum of her own aircraft. She logged the time, drew an arrow, linking it to her earlier entry. Even silence formed a pattern. The ridge's shadows lengthened as the sun shifted west. She nudged her orbit to keep her angle on the western approach. Fuel was stable. Systems held steady. The only movement on her display came from the occasional ghost return at the margins. Beyond the ridgeline, the strike group was gone from sight, its progress hidden by terrain and interference. She tightened her turn, re-established her perimeter hold, and kept watch, alone in the sky. From 20,000 feet, the ridgeline looked like a wall of folded earth. The light was sharp and unforgiving, showing every crease and slope, but the deeper shadows along the valleys hid what mattered most. Mira Donovan scanned the terrain, her eyes moving between the glass of her HUD and the world beyond it. The strike package was deep into its run now. Contrails, breaking into chaotic spirals, where aircraft jinked away from threats. The first sign that the plan was cracking came as a sudden flare in her periphery, a smoke column stabbing upward from a point the maps had marked safe. Her radar bloom shifted, target markers ghosting across positions they had not occupied seconds before. GPS data wavered. A small drift at first, then enough to throw targeting boxes off real terrain features. She adjusted her filters, rechecked her own position. Everything inside her jet read green, which meant the picture outside was lying. Enemy countermeasures were working exactly as intended. Below, a ridge split into two narrow valleys. From her angle, she saw the white arcs of missile trails rising from one, converging on a pair of friendlies breaking over the top. One disappeared in a flare and a sudden drop, smoke marking its fall. The other leveled too low, skimming terrain until a burst from hidden guns ripped through its right wing. The pilot ejected, the chute opening against a backdrop of dust and muzzle flash. The squadron leader's voice cut through the static, calling for a regroup. But it was already breaking up. Fragments of words lost under overlapping transmissions. Group up, vector, then nothing but the sound of overlapping calls that collided, canceled, and vanished into white noise. Mira's pencil moved across her kneeboard, logging coordinates, marking where the ambush was strongest. Something shifted in her field of view. Just beyond a bend in the valley road, heat shimmer rippled above a section that didn't match the rest of the terrain. She rolled slightly, adjusting her angle until the pattern resolved. A convoy sat there, netting stretched over its top, paint mottled to blend with the dirt. From straight ahead, it would look like more ground. From here, the shapes of armored vehicles stood out clearly. She keyed her mic. Halo 2. Eyes on convoy under fire. Only static replied, filling her ears. She tried again. Voice steady but sharper. Still nothing. She was alone with the picture. Below her, the trap closed tighter. What had been planned ingress routes were now kill zones. Hidden launchers fired at angles that forced friendly aircraft into predictable escapes, only to meet guns waiting on the ridges. She could see the plumes of downed jets trailing across the slopes, some ending in fireballs. Others in black, scars against the rock. A second chute drifted lazily in the wind, its pilot swinging in the harness, while tracers reached upward in long, hopeless arcs. Her HUD crosshairs drifted over the convoy again. She could take the shot now. But no clearance meant any action would be a direct break from orders. She let the pipper slide away, refocused on scanning the perimeter. Every few seconds, she checked the far ridge lines for movement. Twice, she spotted the brief glint of optics before they vanished under camouflage cloth. The radio crackled with a half-heard call, someone requesting immediate support. She couldn't tell who, and the voice was gone before she could answer. Her kneeboard was a dense map of pencil lines now, each mark a position, a threat, or a clue. The sound of the pencil's tip against paper felt louder than it should have. A small reminder that she was the only one making this record, A shadow from a passing cloud moved across the valley, momentarily breaking the contrast and making the convoy harder to spot. She adjusted her orbit to keep it in view, banking just enough to keep sunlit angles on the camouflage netting. The shimmer returned. Subtle. But there, her full state remained solid. But she knew that staying in this high hold meant burning more than she would on a straight run home. It didn't matter yet. What mattered was that she could still see, still mark, still keep track, while the rest of the net collapsed. The absence of command was no longer just an oversight. It was a void that shaped every choice she could make. She was now the only aircraft with eyes on the convoy and the broader ambush unfolding around it. The picture was hers alone, unconfirmed and unshared, except for the lines she kept on her kneeboard. Another plume of smoke rose from a ridge farther south, too far for her to see the shooter. She logged it anyway, connecting it to a note she had made 10 minutes earlier about a decoy movement in that sector. The pattern was clear enough to her. She wondered if anyone else would ever see it. She completed another slow turn above the valley. The convoy still under its netting, ground forces still pinned by fire she could trace from ridge to road. The strike group was beyond the ridgeline now. Invisible. Their fates unknown. She leveled her wings, adjusted her throttle to hold position, and kept her circle tight over the target. No one else could see. The low amber glow of the fuel warning pulsed at the edge of Mira Donovan's vision. She had already done the math twice. If she turned back now, she would have just enough to make the carrier. Every extra minute over the inland ridge ate into the margin until it would be gone completely. The doctrine was clear. Low fuel meant return to base. She kept the jet in its slow orbit, eyes locked on the scene below. The ridge lines funneled toward a dusty strip of road where U.S. vehicles sat pinned, their armor scarred and their guns silent. Ridgetop positions spat tracer fire down into the kill box, every streak landing closer to the thin perimeter that was holding. She watched an MRAP reverse into partial cover, only to take a hit from somewhere she couldn't see. Smoke began to curl from its engine bay. Her training spoke in her head. Each rule shaped by years of repetition: maintain roll integrity, follow FUIL protocols, await tasking from command. She knew them all. She also knew there was no one left in position to give her those orders. The silence on the net had stretched long enough to become its own answer. The engine's steady whine had grown louder with the higher power setting she was using to hold her altitude. It pulsed in her bones, a mechanical heartbeat that seemed to sync with her own. She looked again at the pinned vehicles, the muzzle flashes from the ridges, the convoy hidden under its netting and still untouched. She could keep circling until the fuel dictated her exit, or she could use what she had left to change the picture on the ground. She slid her left hand from the throttle to the weapons console. The master arm switch sat there, its protective guard still down. One lift, one press, and there would be no walking the decision back. She opened the guard with a smooth motion, flipped the switch up, and felt the faint click through her glove. Systems confirmed arm status. A line had been crossed. Her HUD shifted to a brighter, more focused layout. She toggled from computer-assisted targeting to manual mode, clearing away the excess symbology. With her right hand on the stick, she rolled the jet into a steep bank toward the engagement zone. The horizon rotated across her visor, pulling the ridges into a vertical plane for a moment before they settled back into place ahead of her. G-forces pressed her into the seat, straps tightening across her chest. She eased the nose down, letting the airspeed climb. The fuel warning blinked faster now, the margin shrinking with every second. The road came into sharp view, the burning MRAP at its center, the ridge guns firing in alternating bursts to keep the defenders locked in place. She marked 3 positions for her first run, adjusting sight lines by hand, feeling the slight resistance in the stick as she trimmed for accuracy. The engine tone rose with the throttle. The whine filled the cockpit, a steady vibration in her helmet and shoulders. She narrowed her focus to the Pipper drifting over the first target. The sight picture framed exactly the way she wanted it. In her peripheral vision, the fuel digits ticked down. She didn't look at them again. The ground drew closer. Heat shimmer distorted the edges of the road. But the ridge positions were sharp in her view. She made a minor correction, adjusting for crosswind, and rechecked her spacing for the next 2 passes. Her kneeboard was still strapped to her leg, today's notes secure under the elastic band. But there would be no more writing until this was over. The moment stretched, not in hesitation, but in the slow precision of setting everything into place. She was no longer thinking about the roster board, the politics, or the lack of response on the net. The only things that mattered were the angle, the range, and the sequence of fire. With the target steady in her HUD and the master arm light glowing at her elbow, she felt the last of the old restraints fall away. Whatever came after the fuel state, the debrief, the questions was irrelevant now. The decision had been made. The Pipper settled exactly where it needed to be. Her hands were steady. The jet was locked into its vector, nose pointed into the heart of the kill box. The first target in sight, Mira Donovan dropped into the valley like a blade through cloth, airspeed climbing past 500 knots. The first run was set before she'd even crossed the ridge. A-18 second armed. Lead and tail of the convoy locked in her mind's eye. She adjusted pitch to skim just above treetop height. The master arm light glowed steady on the panel, a constant reminder of the line she had already crossed. Her heartbeat was the engine whine in her bones, each vibration sinking to her breath. The road snapped into view. Camouflage netting shuddered in the wake of her jet as she leveled out. She released the bombs in a clean, paired drop, the airframe shivering at the moment of separation. The shock wave chased her down the valley, buffeting the jet, as the lead vehicle erupted into fire and the tail vanished under a rolling column of smoke. The trap was split open at both ends. She climbed shallow, keeping low enough to stay under radar lock, and rolled into a tight turn for the second pass. Ridge positions were still spitting tracer fire at the pinned ground units. She flipped to guns, the Vulcan's barrels spinning up with a rising growl. The Pipper slid across the ridgeline and she squeezed the trigger. Streams of 20mm rounds tore into sandbag nests, detonating stored ammunition and sending dust and rock into the air. She corrected mid-burst, raking a second position before pulling back into the turn. The threat tone screamed in her headset, a SAM launch. She caught the white plume cutting upward from the far slope. Without waiting for lock brake protocols, she slammed the stick left and forward, rolling into a low-G maneuver that pressed the horizon into a dizzying tilt. The missile smoke trail arced past, where she had been seconds earlier, disappearing into the ridgeline as she scraped back along the valley floor. The jet shook under the turbulence but stayed obedient under her hands. Countermeasures were gone by the time she leveled again. The dispenser lights glowed empty. She ran a quick mental check of remaining stores, a pair of Mach 82 second and rockets, all unguided. Her targeting computer was already struggling under the interference. Manual it would be. Her kneeboard was a mess of new marks, quick inked angles and altitudes, wind drift estimates scrawled between earlier coordinates. She switched to a clean page mid-turn, doing the math on release timing with one hand while holding altitude and speed with the other. There was no room for hesitation. Every pass meant fuel lost. Every delay meant ground forces still pinned. She lined up on the next run. Nose low. Rockets selected. The manual Pipper floated just ahead of the lead ridge position, still firing. She judged range by the pace of the terrain rushing toward her. Released. And rolled out before the impacts hit. The explosion bloomed in her mirrors, scattering the position into dust and flame. The convoy's middle section was still intact, firing sporadically at anything that moved. She set for the Mach 82 second, adjusting her turn to come in from the south, where the wind would carry debris away from friendly lines. Her calculations gave her a narrow release window. The HUD wasn't helping too much drift in the symbols. She ignored it, trusting her own timing. Release was clean. The bombs hit just short of the central vehicles, the blast wave punching into their flanks and knocking them out of cover. Ground units surged forward. Taking advantage of the gap, she climbed again, scanning for new threats. Seeing the ridge guns finally silenced and the convoy breaking apart under the pressure, the engine's whine was high and insistent now, matching the pounding in her chest as she banked hard to watch the road. Smoke twisted into the wind, hiding sections of the fight, but she could still track movement by heat shimmer and shadow. A few enemy vehicles tried to pull back up a side track, but the slope was too steep, forcing them to stall. She made another quick mark on the kneeboard, noting the retreat path for anyone who could pick them off later. Her focus stayed locked on the main engagement, scanning for any sign of regrouping. The valley was still hot, but the tempo had shifted. Friendly units were moving with momentum again, pushing the fight uphill. The comms hissed. Then a voice broke through for the first time since she'd dropped in. Halo 2. Stay on station. She didn't answer. Her hands stayed on the stick and throttle, holding her orbit over the smoking valley. The master arm light still glowed at her elbow. The kneeboard lay open, ready for the next set of marks. She was already exactly where she needed to be. Mira Donovan kept the Pipper steady on the convoy's lead vehicle as the ground surged upward. The A-18 second were already armed, her altitude dropping fast enough to push the harness tight across her chest. The master arm light glowed steady at her elbow, a quiet reminder of the line she had already crossed. At 600 feet, she eased the nose down a fraction, lined up the release point by eye, and thumbed the pickle switch. The bombs dropped clean, the jet lurching lighter in an instant. She rolled shallow to keep her eyes on the strike. Two muted blossoms of fire rose where the lead and tail vehicles had been. The convoy shuddered to a halt, dust and smoke spilling into the air. She felt the shock wave as a subtle tremor through the airframe before pulling into her climb. The engine's whine climbed with her, a pulse in her ribs. Her second run started almost before the first ended. She banked hard, pulling the nose toward the ridge positions that had been hammering the road. The 20mm Vulcan was already hot. She lined up on the first muzzle flash, walked the Pipper across it, and squeezed the trigger. The sound was a muted vibration inside the cockpit, the tracer line arcing down in tight bursts. Dust leapt from the ridge as the emplacement fell silent. Then she shifted to the next axe, trimming by touch to keep her shots tight. Each target was cleared with 3-second bursts. Nothing wasted. The threat tone screamed in her headset without warning. The sharp, urgent pitch of a surface-to-air lock. Her eyes caught the thin white streak of a missile rising from the far valley wall. She pushed the stick forward and rolled left in one smooth motion, dumping altitude until the ridgeline filled her canopy. The G-load eased to near zero as she skimmed just above the slope, the missile passing over her canopy, close enough for its exhaust to shake the jet. She kicked in countermeasures, the pods spitting flares until the warning tone finally dropped away. Her displays flickered, one sensor feed collapsing into static. The countermeasure pods were empty now. She would have to make every remaining move without the safety net. Guided targeting had already degraded under the enemy's jamming, leaving her manual mode as the only option. She flipped her kneeboard up, scanning the pencil marks she had made between runs, angles, altitudes, wind all there. Waiting for her to use, she set her approach for an unguided drop, running the math in her head while adjusting the throttle for the right entry speed. Her hands were steady on stick and throttle, making micro-corrections as the road swung into view again. The Pipper was a suggestion now, the real aim point coming from muscle memory and calculation. She released at the point she knew would work, felt the airframe kick as the ordnance cleared, and pulled up into a climbing turn. The explosions landed exactly where she intended, cutting through a cluster of vehicles attempting to break out of the kill box. Dust and smoke rose in a rolling curtain, breaking the line of fire from the ridge and giving the U.S. forces a chance to push forward. She saw movement in their perimeter now. Armored vehicles shifting out of their stalls. Infantry spreading into firing positions that had been unreachable minutes earlier. She rolled back toward the ridge, checking for any positions that had survived her earlier passes. One muzzle flash remained. Smaller and further south. She adjusted her path, dipping under a thin veil of smoke to mask her approach. The Vulcan chattered again, recoil barely noticeable through the steady hum of the engine. The target disappeared in a cloud of rock chips and dust. Her kneeboard was a mess now, ink smeared from her gloves, pencil lines drawn over older notes, quick calculations scrawled in margins. She didn't need it for the next run, but she kept it strapped tight. The clutter, a record of how the fight had shifted. The master arm light still burned steady. She checked fuel. Low, but enough for one more pass if she kept it tight. The thought barely registered as she swung the jet north, scanning for any remaining threats. A shadow of movement caught her eye near the far tree line. A group of enemy vehicles trying to reposition under cover. She didn't bother with the HUD symbology, adjusting visually until the angle felt right, then dropping the last of her ordnance in a short, sharp release. The impacts tore through the tree line, scattering debris and ending the movement entirely. Silence settled on the radio for a moment, broken only by the sound of her own breathing and the steady Ineos. Rising heartbeat of the engine. She climbed back to her hold altitude, scanning the ground for any threats she might have missed. The ridge guns were gone. The convoy shattered. The kill box no longer one-sided. She could see the U.S. ground forces moving with purpose now. No longer pinned by fire from above, the radio crackled, a voice finally cutting through the static. Halo 2, stay on station. She didn't answer. The engine's hum was steady, her orbit already locked in above the valley. She was exactly where she needed to be. The carrier deck rose to meet her. The angled landing area lined with yellow and green-jerseyed crew moving in precise, practiced signals. Blast deflectors stood ready behind parked jets. Heat shimmer rising from their exhausts. Mira Donovan eased the throttle back, caught the wire with a solid jolt, and let the jet roll to a stop under the marshaller's guidance. She worked through the shutdown sequence by touch, switches flipped down in order. Fuel cut. Displays fading to black. The master arm light went dark. She pulled the oxygen mask free. The scent of rubber replaced by salt air, rushing in as the canopy lifted. The deck smell was a mix of jet exhaust and the faint tang of the ocean. The deck crew moved in without ceremony. Chocks in place. Safety pins inserted. A mechanic glanced up at her cockpit and gave a single, unhurried nod before turning back to his work. Off to the side. A junior pilot watched her taxi in, helmet tucked under one arm, gaze steady in a way that wasn't there before. Her headset carried the background chatter of the deck, clipped calls and confirmations passing from crew to tower. She could have keyed her mic, announced her return, but she let it ride in silence. The inversion of the day's earlier motif was hers to own now. She climbed down the ladder, boots hitting the warm deck, and walked toward the island without looking back at the jet. The kneeboard, still strapped to her thigh and smudged with notes from the fight, went into her flight bag without comment. Inside, the ready room was lit by flat fluorescent tubes. The air cooler, but carrying the stale edge of old coffee. The faint vibration of the ship's engines came up through the deck plates, steady as breathing. Pilots milled at the far end, trading remarks in low tones. Her name did not come up. No one mentioned the convoy, the ridges, or what had kept the ground forces from breaking. She unzipped her flight suit to the collar, set her helmet down on the bench beside her, and sat. The chatter from outside was muffled here, replaced by the constant hum of the carrier. Alone in the ready room, she let the silence hold.